Hello and welcome back. Today we are here with a very special and very inspiring Dr. Scott Stoll. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Gianna. It's a delight to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Before we dive into the questions, please tell me about the Plantrition Project and plantbaseddocs.com.
Yeah, thank you. And as you know, we both serve on the Plantrition board, which is such an honor.
It is.
And the Plantrition Project really got its start in like 2012, 2013. I recognized that it took me a long time to learn about plant-based nutrition as a physician, and then even longer to understand how to really implement that for my patients in my practice. My wife and I even created a cookbook for my patients. So I was talking with my friend Tom Dunham, who helps me organize the immersions in Florida, and I simply said to Tom, you know what, we need to start a conference to help doctors understand plant-based nutrition. So we started our first conference in 2013 in Florida, and we had about 180 people from a dozen countries, and it was successful. So after that conference, one of our partners at that time, Susan Benegas, who now is the director of the ACLM, had said to us, well, we should wrap all of this in a not-for-profit so that we can begin developing tools, resources, and opportunities for physicians to implement plant-based nutrition in their practice around the globe. So that's when we started the Plantrition Project, and it's grown since then.
How many guests just came this past year in Oakland?
So yes, we have a number of conferences that have grown out of that first conference.
That's true.
So we have the International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference, the one you're referring to, which is in California. And we had about 1,200 healthcare providers, and 70% were doctors.
That's amazing.
From 26 different countries.
That's amazing.
We have a conference in New York that's going to be in June every year.
Nice.
We're starting a new conference in Bangkok, Thailand this year.
Nice.
London this year. Yes, please come. We're going to have an amazing time in Thailand.
I want to go to Thailand.
I did a conference in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia,
That's right,
and we helped start one in Australia. So we're reaching around the world with this information. It's so exciting to see doctors grabbing a hold of this and beginning to transform their patients' lives.
And then, so plantbaseddocs.com is, I'll let you explain.
Yeah, so plantbaseddocs.com came because we realized that patients were having trouble finding plant-based doctors, and plant-based doctors were having trouble connecting with patients. So we wanted to create a connecting place. So we started plantbaseddocs.com as a website that would list healthcare providers, not only doctors, but nurses and physician's assistants, health coaches, dietitians, and it becomes a resource for people that are looking for assistance in their area or through telehealth.
Is it launched now? Or is
We are
this
launching
being-
there currently is a website up, plantbaseddocs.com. It's been there for about 4 years.
Okay.
We're doing a reboot on the
Right.
website right now, and we're building it on an artificial intelligence platform,
That's right, I remember
which really allows for some wonderful search options and some amazing ways that patients can connect with doctors. But it's also going to create a smart FAQ so people can ask questions, and it will crawl through the databases of like Dr. Greger's and our database and pull in the information that's relevant to give them a science-based answer to their question.
That's amazing.
We're really excited about it.
And when's that going to be officially, like, say if the audience wants to go to plantbaseddocs.com and find a plant-based doctor and do all this stuff, when can they do that?
Yeah, so by April 1st, you should be able to go to plantbaseddocs.com and find a physician or a healthcare provider near you, and we're also going to have telehealth. So if there's not somebody in your vicinity, somebody practicing through telehealth in your area can assist you as well.
When did you choose to adopt a whole food plant-based diet in your home and in your practice?
That's a great question. I have to always start with this because I was a 1994 Olympian, and I only say that because I thought I understood nutrition. And my first year of medical school, my wife came to me and she said, you know what, Scott, I think that we should change our diet and become vegan. So the first thing I said was what? Where am I going to get my protein? That's right. Where am I going to get my protein? And I didn't listen to my wife.
Oh, no.
And I should have.
You always have to listen to your wife.
No, I've been married 25 years and I have learned that lesson. I listen immediately now.
Yes. Good tip.
Because it took me about 7 years to finally catch up. And I was in practice after medical school and residency. And my patients kept saying to me, Dr. Stoll, can't you help me? I'm falling apart. And I thought this was the inevitable consequence of aging. You know, I'd learned in medical school that some people get heart disease, some people get high blood pressure, some diabetes, some autoimmune disease, and some cancer. It's a roll of the dice. Maybe you can prevent it with a good diet, but I didn't know. So I assumed that that's what happened, and I treated them. Prescriptions, injections, tests, imaging, and I saw them getting worse over time. And then there was a day in my practice, a woman was sitting on my exam table, and she said, Dr. Stoll, can't you help me? I'm falling apart. And I laughed, but I stopped and I asked her a question that changed my life. I said to her, what does falling apart mean to you? And like most doctors, you're not really ready to listen. So I'm looking at her past medical history list thinking, well, is it her back pain? Is it her history of heart disease, breast cancer? Is it a side effect from medications? But she stopped me in my tracks when she said, my marriage is falling apart because my husband is sick and tired of taking care of me. I can't travel to see my grandchildren because I can't reliably get on an airplane and fly to Washington. I can't go to church regularly on Sunday. My friends have stopped coming around and I'm depressed, and we're facing financial bankruptcy. And with tears running down her cheeks, she said, can you help me?
Oh boy.
And I felt completely inept at that point. I remembered all the binders of pharmacology that I had studied, 4 years of medical education, residency, all the things I'd been trained to do, and I had absolutely nothing to help her put her life back together again. And I also realized in that moment that everything that I was looking at on her past medical history list, diseases that I'd memorized and understood, were not just diseases, but they were eroding the most valuable things in her life. Relationships, her spiritual life, opportunity with her grandchildren, financial stability, hope, all being completely eroded because of these past medicals. So that set me on, I walked out of that room and I just said to myself, Scott, what are you going to do to help the next person put their life back together again? And it set me on this learning journey. It started with reading diet books, because I thought certainly one of these smart doctors has got this figured out.
Dr. Joel Fuhrman's, right?
I got there later.
Okay.
I read Atkins to Zone first and Sugar Busters, and when I finished, I was more confused than when I started.
Seriously?
Right? High carb, low carb, high
Which
fat,
one do
low
you
fat.
choose?
What do you choose? They all had science, bibliographies, testimonies.
And you just get
Good
confused
stories.
and say, I'm just going to eat whatever I want.
That's right. And then I found a large meta-analysis study, which looks at like 900 different diet studies. And they found that the average success rate for somebody that starts a diet of keeping 20 pounds off for 5 years is 15% or less. So 85% of the people that start any of these diet books are never going to be successful. So I knew there had to be a better way. And so that's when I started to go back to some of my nutritional roots. I was nutritional sciences as an undergrad. Mm-hmm. I started to read the literature and discovered more plants, healthier body. And so I said, it can't be this easy, can it?
Yep.
It is.
How long have you been married, and how many children do you have? I've heard the majority of your children, except your oldest son, have never even taken antibiotics, have never had a sore throat or ear infections. Also, you and your wife are in your 50s and have no medical issues and take no medications. How is this even possible?
It's amazing. It's a great blessing. You know, that I just hear that now. I think, wow, that is a blessing.
You guys are like the
amazing.
super family.
We are so blessed.
You are.
You know, we have 6 children.
Yeah.
And when we changed our diet, you know, we had 3 children when we made that change,
Yes.
like 2004. And immediately after we made that change, even the congestion that my son Sammy had cleared up right away. And from that point on, my children have been so healthy. I mean, they have never required antibiotics.
Wow.
They've never had strep throat, never had an ear infection. If they get a cold, it lasts a couple days and they bounce right back.
And how do you guys treat the common cold?
We just
fluids
do
and
supportive care. We do some herbs and water and rest. And they always...
like elderberry or something?
Elderberry, eucalyptus, that's right.
That's amazing.
And they always recover so well. And they're healthy and strong. And you know, the protein question, I
Yes.
always get that. My son Gabriel now is almost 18.
Yeah.
And he's about 180 pounds.
Yeah.
And he's only plant-based.
That's amazing.
And his
Go
secret,
Gabriel.
secret is peas.
Peas.
We call him Pea Man. We figured it out one year. He eats 180 pounds of peas. That's his favorite snack. So we buy 5-pound bags of frozen peas.
That's amazing.
And he fills up the bowl and he snacks on peas.
I love it. Even frozen peas are quite delicious.
They're delicious.
That's so cool. So you have 6 children. You've been married for how long?
25 years in May this year.
What made you and your wife, Kristen, want to homeschool your children, and what is the process of doing so?
Wow, that's a great question. I wasn't expecting that one, Gianna. So it's something that we decided to do when I was in medical school before we even had children.
Yeah.
And we wanted to do it for several reasons. One, we really like the idea of being able to control their education in such a way that we can play to their strengths, find out what they really love to do, what they're passionate about, and help them pursue that with all their might and learn everything that they can about that area. And also to identify weaknesses. and really come alongside of those weaknesses so they don't fall behind in those areas. It gave us an opportunity to diversify their education, language, and music. And one of the things that we really love to do is travel with our children. So I often take one of my children with me when I'm on the road. And so they've been in medical conferences, they've been in board meetings, they go to our immersions.
How fun.
And an example of how this has really been so beautiful, my son Dawson, who's 22 now, he just turned 22 today.
Happy birthday, Dawson.
Yeah, happy birthday, Dawson. He has two beautiful little daughters.
Oh.
But I took him with me for so many years to the plant-based conference. And he would do video work there, and he became so comfortable that one day I couldn't find him.
Yeah.
And I found him sitting at a table with a bunch of physicians just having a conversation. And to me, that just really solidified part of the reason that we homeschooled, because he was so well adapted and felt so comfortable having a conversation with professionals.
That's amazing. And how old was he when he was having a conversation with all these doctors?
16, 17.
Whoa, keeping up with them. That's
Yeah.
so amazing.
It's been the greatest thing that we have done, I think, for our children.
And so since all of them are different ages, do you have different levels of education? Do you have a teacher that comes in and teaches all of them?
My wife is the primary teacher.
And she teaches all the different grades.
She is amazing. There's so much curriculum out there today and so many different ways to meet the children and kind of play to their learning ability and learning styles. So we identify the curriculum that fits each of them.
Yeah.
And then my wife helps them organize, and I kind of pull in with science and math. And we've had tutors come through the years, and on Tuesdays they go to an arts school in New Jersey, where they do music and they do digital art, they do choir, they learn all the different arts, and so it's really fantastic.
Cool life.
It's a great life, and they learn how to be self-disciplined. They get up early, they get their work done, and they're done by 1 or 2, and then they can explore other interests.
Are you guys real?
We are real. And our family is not perfect. You can come stay with us. We are very real. We work through challenges.
Do you think there's a link between vaccines and autism, or at a minimum, a compromising of the immune system and physiological function?
I think one of the challenges with the research on vaccines is that because we're looking at populations and we're looking at susceptible groups of people, we can never prove causation. And so there's associations but not causation, and therefore it makes it very challenging. I think the reason that some of the research may show associations, at least in my understanding of this, is a fewfold. One, that the immune systems of our youth today are compromised. They're compromised because of what mom eats during pregnancy.
Or grandmom too, right?
And grandmother with epigenetics. They're compromised because many of them are not breastfed. They're compromised because of the food they're eating when they're young. They're compromised because of herbicides like glyphosate that destroy the microbiome. They're compromised because I just heard this the other day that 40% of our youth are only sleeping 5 hours a night. They should be sleeping 12. So that's a stressor on the body. It's disrupting the gut bacteria. It's decreasing their immune strength and vitality. So their immune systems are compromised. We have this tremendous assault on their bodies from toxins in the environment. And then we're adding lots of vaccines to a body that is growing rapidly, especially a nervous system that's highly susceptible. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics has put forth a prolonged vaccination schedule, which at the very least I think is the safest thing for parents to do if they have to be vaccinated, because children today in public schools have to be vaccinated.
So just space it out over time.
So space it out over time, strengthen the child's immune system to minimize any potential impact on that developing brain.
Were you ever concerned with extracurricular activities with your children, like the music and sports or whatever they choose to do where they weren't vaccinated, that they would catch something? Were you ever concerned about that? No.
I have not been. And what we decided to do, that as they get older, as we travel to third world countries and go other places, we start vaccinating at that point in time. But their bodies are strong and robust. They have amazing immune systems, and the vaccinations really don't harm them at that point.
Okay.
And so as they need them, and as it's required, we'll vaccinate them at that point. But we've minimized the risk by being able to do that.
Did they ever get chickenpox?
They did get chickenpox.
Wow.
They did, but it was mild.
Yeah.
Lasted a few days and it was gone, and now they're vaccinated.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
They picked it up.
Is there a link between added food dyes and children with ADHD, also known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder?
The research has indeed shown that the food dyes and the chemicals in our food are an irritant to the brain, along with a number of other substances that children are consuming, including sugar, and processed food that they're consuming. Number one drink in many homes across America is soda today, filled with caramel color and dyes. Children are eating at least 2/3 of their diet from processed food that's filled with dyes and sugar. And so their brains are just like vibrating with hyperactivity.
So rather than going on medication, just take out those foods and replace them with whole plant foods.
Absolutely. I have seen incredible transformations in children. When they simply transition their diet over to a whole food plant-based diet, they get rid of the garbage, their brain calms down, and they have incredible focus. And their hyperactivity becomes much more normalized and focusable, and it actually becomes a benefit to them because they can accomplish great things. In fact, as you know, a lot of CEOs and very successful people have ADHD. Yeah. And so when it's well controlled, it gives you probably a great platform for success. But living on this processed diet today does them so much harm, and then they get a label, which is really harmful, I think, too. They're labeled, and that becomes part of their identity,
I know.
which really is damaging.
It's true.
And then they're on medications, and they start to believe certain things about themselves that limit their potential, and they're actually lies about who they really are.
That's very true. You are also a Christian and link a biblical perspective to your approach and view of health. Research has shown that today evangelical church members are some of the least healthy of all religious groups in the United States. They have higher blood pressures and higher cholesterol levels than any other religious groups. In your opinion, how do faith and food go together?
Wow, thank you for that question. That's so important. When I started this process, 2010, 2011, I started researching, and I found that statistic that you just read. And it really broke my heart to see that, this group of people that are following Jesus, that are called to be the light of the world, called to influence the world positively, are also the most unhealthy religious group of any group in America. And when they looked at pastors and priests, they're more unhealthy than the lay people. So it's really tragic. And when I visited with pastors, they were sharing with me that they spend so much time praying for the sick, visiting the sick in the hospital, which is good. Yeah. But it consumes so much resources that they aren't able to do many of the other activities that they would like to be involved in. So I started to see that this link between, the diet that's popular in America, that is causing believers to be sick, that's again eroding and depleting resources in the church and inhibiting the church from being able to go forth. And even in church, I find and I've spoken in lots of churches, there's so much conversation around illness. Yeah. And very little conversation about the Great Commission, going out, ministering to the inner city, or changing lives, or changing our neighborhoods, or meeting the needs of our neighbors, because we become so self-focused because of our illness. And I just saw that there's such an opportunity to restore hope to the church and restore resources by simply changing our diet.
Yeah. And so what do you personally tell people who bring up biblical verses that maybe support eating meat? Or I know what I tell them. Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice, and we don't have to kill animals anymore. I feel like in the Old Testament, every time somebody killed an animal, it was like because they sneezed. I mean, it was over silly reasons, and we don't have to do that anymore. So what do you personally tell them when somebody would say that to you?
Yeah, so what I usually say is that if we look at Genesis 1:29, God's original provision of food for all life was plants. It was trees with fruit, it was grasses and herbs, grains. That was the original provision. It was only after the flood that we see that God told Noah, just as I gave you the green plants, so now I give you everything that creeps on the ground. And I believe it was a provision for a changed world where people would not have access to plants.
Well, plus everything was flooded, so you wouldn't be able to eat
It was a changed
plants.
world, right? So it was a provision.
Yeah.
But now we live in a totally different time where we are so blessed that we can run down to the grocery store 24/7. We can grow food. And now during this season of Earth's history, we can return to that Garden of Eden lifestyle where we're eating plants. And it's unnecessary to kill and eat animals.
Let's talk about how our food and bodies have become hijacked. There was a study done on a vegan processed food diet having the same inflammation effects on the body as an animal food diet. Can we touch a little bit on this study, and how much processed food do you think is okay to have in the diet, even as a vegan?
Wow, that's a great question. One of the things that I recognized in my practice early on is that just because you're a vegan or vegetarian does not mean you're healthy. I saw many unhealthy vegans and vegetarians come through my door with the same lifestyle diseases that people on the standard American diet were also fighting. And I began to realize that many of the things in the standard American diet were still in the vegan diet. Saturated fats, oils, sugars, refined grains that were causing the same level of inflammation and disease in vegans and vegetarians, which is one of the reasons that in healthcare and working with patients, I really try to say whole food plant-based diet to focus them on what they need to eat.
Yes.
Because if they go to the store today, even the title plant-based has been hijacked by the processed food industry. So I really want people to think about what they're supposed to eat. And in many cases, vegan would lead them astray down this wide array of processed foods. But the studies show that in people with cardiovascular disease, an unhealthy plant-based diet has a higher risk ratio for heart disease than actually an animal diet.
Wow.
And the only diet that reduced your risk was a healthy plant-based diet. And the same for people with diabetes. The risk ratios for type 2 diabetes are higher on an unhealthy plant-based diet than even an animal-based diet.
So that's why everybody says, well, I went vegan and I got sick.
Right, I gained weight, I got sick, that's right. They even did a study, which was really interesting, looking at darker colored fruits and vegetables compared with lighter colored fruits and vegetables. And they measured the high sensitivity CRP, a measure of inflammation, over the course of 2 weeks. And they found that people eating the dark colors, the dark leafy greens, the blueberries, the blackberries, the kales, the cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, versus the white ones like potatoes and pears and white cabbage and the white colored vegetables. The white colored vegetables had a slow increase in inflammation over 2 weeks, but the dark colored vegetables decreased inflammation by almost 20% over the course of 2 weeks. So even the quality of a whole food plant-based diet matters. And so when I am working with patients, I tell them that you really, if you have a disease, you have to fight with every bite. And the way to fight with every bite is to eat high quality, dark vegetables and fruits, and to get as many of those in your diet as you possibly can. And to minimize the processed food and use that only as a celebration occasionally, once or twice a month, but to really focus on predominantly whole plant foods as close as possible to the way they were grown.
Does moderation establish a goal of superior health, or does eating unhealthy and processed foods, including meat and dairy, in moderation still lead to disease?
Yeah, so just yesterday I was in an Uber with a driver, and I was telling him about, I love him, and I was telling him about diets and health, and he says, my motto is everything in moderation.
Oy.
And I said, well, why do you believe that? And what is moderation? And he couldn't explain it. And I said, for instance, in 1900, the average person ate 5 pounds of sugar per person per year. So moderate sugar consumption would have been 3 to 5 pounds. Today, we're like over 140 pounds of sugar and sweeteners. So what's moderate today? We don't really have a measurable standard, and I would argue that the standard of moderation is always sliding away. And we don't have a memory very well. As humans, we're master rationalizers and justifiers. And so our moderation even slips away over the course of 2 to 5 years. We see this in things like alcohol consumption. Moderate consumption is 1 drink a week, and before you know it, it's 2 beers a night. Happens all the time. Same thing with food. In a course of just 3 to 5 years, moderate consumption can be double what it was 5 years ago for yourself. And I think we have to be careful with moderation for a number of reasons. That number one, people are born with different genetic susceptibilities. So we know that some people are born with incredible antioxidant systems, glutathione systems. They can really probably smoke their entire life, drink alcohol, and live to 95 and have very few diseases or complications. Others are born with great susceptibility, and so even small amounts can manifest disease in their life. So that's number one. Number two, we live in a day and age when the body is under assault like we've never seen before. When we sample human fat, we have 600 different chemicals in our human fat.
Ooh.
In the cord blood of neonates, they have at least 12 toxic chemicals that are identified in the cord blood. So they're exposed even in utero to these chemicals. Glyphosate is on many of our fields. It's decimating our microbiome. So we're upside down in many ways. So even what people consumed moderately back in the 80s could cause disease in someone today because our bodies have higher degrees of toxins and disrupted microbiomes. And so the moderation question is really important, and it's important for people to realize that we can't eat moderately and be successful. I always tell my children too, and I give this example, I would never tell my children, I want you to study moderately to be successful. If we want excellence, we have to work toward excellence with excellent effort. And the same with our health. If we want optimal, excellent health, then every single day we need to pursue excellence in our diet, and then we will achieve it.
The way we eat does, in so many ways, spill over to other areas of life. So many ways.
It is amazing, isn't it? How that it reflects so much of what's in our heart when we get down to the decisions about what we eat.
Yeah. In your book, The Next Bite, you say, when we change our diet, it has a profound impact on every other area of life. Food choices are an inheritance. They interact with our genes and will affect the next 2 generations. Our food choices will shape our finances, friendship, traditions, and habits. They can indirectly influence the strength of our marriages and our families, modify our careers and future plans, dramatically adjust our savings, retirement, and inheritance, change our moods, regulate our ability to think and reason, and ultimately transform the opportunities for us to express and share our unique gifts with the world. So true. How can the food we eat really change our lives and others' lives?
Yeah, and when I started this long ago, looking for a solution to help people put their lives back together again, I really had no idea the depth to which food reaches and touches every element of life.
It does.
It is like one of the core foundations of life. It is one of the most powerful influencers of life on earth.
Seriously.
And what we choose today is also one of the most powerful influencers of the future that we are stewarding for our children. And, it really goes back to the whole idea of like seed to table and table to cell. So it's that whole journey of seed to cell and what happens that really dictates how these things influence every part of life. The way that we treat the soil is the way that we actually ultimately treat the future generation. And we're seeing today that we're losing an inch of topsoil every year. And in fact, a dump truck load of topsoil is washing down the Mississippi every second now out into the Gulf of Mexico. And topsoil is a limited resource. And it's estimated that we've lost 40% of our topsoil. So we have about 60 harvests left, or 60 years left, if we don't make changes in the way that we're growing food.
That's my next question about soil, so I really want to dive into that with you.
And so, the way that we're treating the soil and the way that we're growing food is impacted by the choices. And it really comes down to every single day we have a choice 2 or 3 times a day about what we put on our plate.
Yeah.
And we have to ask ourselves, why am I choosing this food? We have to be much more intentional and conscious around the choices, knowing that whatever I put on my plate has some impact upon the history of that food as it made its way to my plate, including the farm families that we're supporting, what they're standing for, how they're caring for the soil and the environment, the frogs that are suffering from atrazine and other things that are being used on fields, the distributors, farmers in third world countries and the way they're being treated, based on the food that we're choosing. And the food that we choose, if we're choosing healthy food from like regenerative agriculture, every stakeholder, from the farmer to the distributor to the person at the grocery store to us, benefits. And then when I eat well and I feel well and I have energy and my microbiome is producing serotonin, the happy hormone, and my brain's not inflamed, I feel great, I have great energy, my interactions with people are far better, I'm more patient, I'm more joyful, I'm happier, I'm kinder, and their lives are changed, and it's this incredible ripple effect. And economically, it changes us as a country and a world economically when we don't have this massive chronic disease burden that every country is facing today. resources. I mean, everything has changed when we just simply change what's on our plate. It seems like the simplest solution, but it's so complex because there's so many things that interact with the choices about what we put on our plate.
Yeah, it's like it was designed for it to be that way, and then when we do it, miracles happen.
Miracles. Beautiful abundance flows out of the right choice on our plate.
Yeah. Do you believe we should be eating predominantly organic, if not 100% organic? If so, why? Why is the soil health so important to our own health?
So first, I want to remove any guilt from people that might
For
feel
sure, for
like
sure.
they cannot afford organic.
Yes.
So I always tell people, if you can't afford organic, that's fine. Buy as many fruits and vegetables as you can possibly eat and eat them.
Yes,
And
yes.
if you can start to grow your own fruits and vegetables, that's the greatest way and the least expensive way to have organic fruits and vegetables in your home. So I think that's really important because some people I know struggle to afford any kinds of fruits or vegetables. And in fact, frozen is more nutritious often than fresh. And so that's a great way for people to save as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a great way to get organic because it's usually less when it's frozen.
Yeah.
So with that, then organic is so important. And regenerative organic is even more important, as we'll talk about in just a minute. But the reason for regenerative organic is several-fold. Oftentimes we think about organic just as we're trying to minimize our exposure to pesticides and herbicides like glyphosate. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, when glyphosate was first produced, the first patent that was filed by the company for glyphosate was for an antibiotic.
Whoa.
And so it was going to go down the pharmaceutical road, so they withdrew that and they applied for an herbicide. And so it actually kills bacteria. And, for example, when they spray it on wheat, wheat is typically treated 10 times before it's harvested. And so the glyphosate goes in. It doesn't harm human cells, that's absolutely true. But if it kills bacteria, we have 100 trillion bacteria in our gut.
And you say we're more bacteria than we are human.
We are more bacteria than we are human by DNA weight. That is correct. So that's why the glyphosate's important. But for so long, organic and the regenerative organic has been focused on mitigating and minimizing the exposure to pesticides and herbicides, which is very important. Mm-hmm. It's important not just for people, but it's important for the runoff that comes from those fields because it runs off into streams. And one of the challenges we've had in Pennsylvania is that the pesticides and herbicides and things like atrazine are flowing into the streams and they're killing the amphibians, little frogs and tadpoles and salamanders. And so we're losing some of that biodiversity because it's running into the fields. We also see that when it flows finally down into the oceans, there are dead zones where it runs into the oceans. I don't know if you've seen that, but there's a dead zone outside the Gulf of Mexico that's the size of New Jersey, where no life exists.
And for the audience, why can't life exist in a dead zone? What exactly is that?
The dead zone is where all of these pesticides, herbicides, nitrogen fertilizers have flowed into the oceans, and they create an environment where life cannot exist. There's no oxygen in the water, kills the plants, and so the water is lifeless in those areas. But then, so the benefit of regenerative agriculture is that not only are we stripping away pesticides and herbicides, but they are using cover crops to replenish the soil. And so what Rodale has done some amazing research over the last 30 years. They show that by using cover crops, which is planting like legumes and different crops on the soil that pull nitrogen from the air and replenish the soil, that it not only makes the soil richer, but it rebuilds topsoil in decades instead of centuries.
That's amazing.
And so they're able to restore fields that were once damaged and replenish topsoil and create more nutrient-rich plants. And one of the other interesting pieces of research that comes out of this, they're finding that when plants grow in organic soil, they're sucking up nutrients from that organic soil and from the billions of microbes that live in the soil, and they are developing phytochemicals that you can't find in conventional produce. For example, Rodale has done research with Hershey Medical Center, and they found that plants grown in organic soil develop a phytochemical called ergothioneine, which is a very potent anti-cancer phytochemical. But plants grown in conventional soil do not have any ergothioneine. And in general, organic plants have about 60% more phytochemicals and antioxidants than conventional.
So it's more nutritious.
It's far more nutritious. And we think that we're getting more of that breakfast, lunch, and dinner 3 times a day. Our bodies are sucking up those nutrients, mitigating the effects of free radicals and toxins and pesticides. and allowing our bodies to heal over time. So
How can we lessen our carbon footprint by going organic too? How does that work?
yeah, and what's really amazing, that's the other part of this regenerative organic story, is that the plants are pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and burying it into the ground. And in fact, some of the grasses bury it deep into the ground. And so Rodale has shown that they can lessen carbon in the atmosphere by more than 60%. And in some models, almost 100% of the carbon can be withdrawn from the atmosphere and buried in the soil.
Wow.
So not only are we regenerating our soil, we're regenerating the atmosphere, assisting in restoring climate that's been so disrupted. We're getting greater nutrient density in our foods that we feed ourselves. It's better for the farmers. The farm families aren't exposed to toxins, and farm families that are exposed to toxins have children with lower IQs, lower birth weight babies, more complicated pregnancies, higher risk of leukemia in children. So farm families are better, and every stakeholder along the way is better. And it's actually the real price of food that's being passed along. So if you can start growing something in your home, it's so good for the children. To just see the power of planting the seed in the dirt and see this beautiful thing come up that you can harvest. It creates a beautiful relationship with food that doesn't exist if we're just buying food in packages and consuming it.
Very true. Animal agriculture now covers 45% of Earth's total land and is the leader in antibiotic use and resistance. Can you explain why this is so dangerous, especially that we're more bacteria than human according to our DNA?
That's right. Yeah, so animal agriculture has, consumed so much of the land. There was a large study in 2018 where they looked at more than 39,000 farms around the world that comprised about 90% of the food that we eat, and they found that 80% of the farmland is dedicated to animal agriculture, which only supplies about 37% of our total calories and 18% of our protein. So
18%.
Yeah, so it's really a disproportionate use of land for some kind of a food product when we have a world that really needs to be fed. And as you mentioned, this animal agriculture, it's not a benign agricultural activity on the land. These large CAFOs have toxic runoff. They promote sickness and disease and pests and flies and insects. The animals are stressed, and so they have to use antibiotics not only for sickness but for growth. And the antibiotics find their way into the animals. They develop resistance, which finds its way into humans. And it's the primary source of antibiotic resistance bacteria. And then we have fungus as well that's coming out of this. It's harmful to our bacteria in our gut. We know that mothers that are consuming animal products, if they're eating like a pound of animal products per day, it's impacting the health of the fetus. It increases the risk of cancer, hypertension in the fetus, increases the cortisol susceptibility, which is the stress hormone in fetuses as they get older, so that adults of parents that have consumed a lot of animal products have higher resting levels of cortisol, and then when they respond to stress, their cortisol levels go up even higher. And so it becomes a great burden everywhere in the world. It's very destructive, the current animal agricultural model that we're utilizing for food. In contrast, if we just shift toward a plant-based model for food, that's the same amount of land that would feed just a family can feed 14 people in a plant-based diet. And if we're using regenerative agriculture, it's only having positive benefits on the environment, on the land, on our microbiome, on our health, on economies of the world. So there has to be a shift. We're at a tipping point where we cannot continue doing what we're doing because every place is being burdened by the decisions that we're making. And it's actually a very exciting time to be alive because we know that if we shift in the right direction, regeneration typically happens faster than we anticipate or could imagine. We know that places like in the Middle East are looking at doubling diabetes in the next 10 years. And so some of these trends are just completely unsustainable because they will bankrupt countries. We're already bankrupting our land, they bankrupt countries. But the good news is that, just like when we see bodies, if somebody comes to my health immersion and they've abused their body for 20 years and we feed them a plant-based diet, they get a little bit of rest and a little bit of exercise. In 1 week, we often are decreasing medications. They tell us, I haven't felt this good in years. Their inflammatory levels go down, pain goes away in just a week. So we see the regenerative potential of the human body, that when we give it the right thing, it regenerates much more quickly than we anticipate. 20 years of disease can be suspended and in many cases predominantly reversed in just 12 to 18 months.
That's amazing.
And the land works the same way. We see that with Rodale. If they do the right thing to the soil, in just decades we're rebuilding soil and we're replenishing soil and we're pulling carbon from the air. So, I really am not pessimistic when I look at all these statistics. I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
Because I believe that when we start doing the right things and making the right choices, and if we simply change what's on our plate, the regenerative potential of a plant-based diet is profound.
That's true. Well, I would like to end with a very inspirational quote from your book. Hope is a very powerful emotion. Emerging studies have found that when people have hope, areas of the brain that are involved in long-term planning, organization, and strategic concepts begin to become activated. Choosing hope turns on the light in the darkness, opens a doorway in the alley, and lowers a ladder in the pit. Even through the darkest of storms, we can still choose our response. All things are possible if and when we make the right choices. So thank you. Thank you for all
Gianna.
that you're doing. Thank you for all that you're healing. Thank you for all that you're inspiring. You're so special, and I'm so excited and thankful that we have you here and we get to give this information to people. I think it's going to be so helpful and inspiring.
It has been an honor to be here. Thank you so much for this great opportunity.
You're welcome. And I want to promote your books. You and your wife created this fun coloring book for kids. It's called God's Garden Friends, and it talks about all the fruits and vegetables that exist. I think it's just so fun.
And we wove in our children's names in there. So
Did you?
yes, they're all in there.
I love that. I love that little tip. I read the whole thing and I was like, wow, I didn't know that. I'm going to eat more of that. I'm going to eat more bok choy. So even like I, that know a lot about nutrition, learned some stuff. And Alive, it's available on Amazon. And also the book that you just wrote.
Your Next Bite will be
Your
out
Next Bite.
hopefully by April 1st.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'll have to get an actual copy of that.
I will get you a copy. It'll be my pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks so much for tuning in. Love, Gianna and
Scott Stoll.